test. But when she returned to work yesterday, she developed symptoms and later tested positive.
We already have over 100 people who have been asked to isolate for 14 days and to be tested. And of course, we have our full testing teams up and running in the northwest this morning.
That includes 80 quarantine officers and hotel staff. It's the state's second case of hotel transmission in the space of a week.
We'll also start today the testing of staff on their days off. That will commence from today.
In New South Wales, a Wollongong resident tested positive 2 days after finishing hotel quarantine. An investigation is underway into whether the virus was contracted overseas or in the hotel. The positive case only uncovered due to the new tests on day 16.
These new variants are a worry to us because they are doing things that are different, not only being more infectious and more serious, but the length of time that they can become infectious for and the time before they become infectious is changing.
Meanwhile, South Africa has halted use of the AstraZeneca vaccine after early signs it wasn't very effective against their mutation. But that hasn't deterred our government.
We're already seeing in quite a number of countries where the vaccine is being rolled out that not only is it delivering real results in preventing serious illness, but also we're seeing some early signs about its impact on preventing transmission.
Elsewhere, the WHO estimates up to 30% of the Pfizer vaccine is going to waste, given its short 6-hour viability once removed from its deep freeze. It's prompted mandatory training for Australians about to administer the jab.
Handling and storage, safety and surveillance, all of the elements which will be critical to ensuring that vaccination occurs in a safe and effective way.
So as the virus continues to evolve, can our response evolve fast enough to keep up?
Harry's not coping with the swabs or the needle shots, so we're just going to go straight to our guest. Epidemiologist Professor Catherine Bennett joins us now. Catherine, let's start with this New South Wales case, which is the first instance we know of in Australia in which someone didn't test positive until after the 2-week quarantine period, however that came about. Should we be worried about it?
Look, we should always be worried if something shows a different pattern. Of course, this is the first time we've tested those 2 days after someone's released from quarantine. New South Wales just introduced this. So we don't know if this might have happened before. There might be very slow incubation period. Seems unlikely. We haven't had that reported around the world. Very unusual to have something, not just more than 14 days, but probably going back to the airport where they left from originally. So we don't know yet. It could also be potentially a long-term shedder who's intermittent shedding the virus. So we've yet to really understand what this is and whether it's a risk of hotel transmission as well, whether they've ruled that out yet.
So it may not mean that we have to change practices. For example, I notice in New Zealand they've just introduced that after the 14-day quarantine in hotel, you're then expected to self-isolate at home for a further 5. Do you think that's something we would do?
Look, if someone gets any symptoms at all, they are asked to isolate immediately, test and stay isolated. It's only if they have no symptoms they're asked to do this follow-up test. I guess if they find this particular case shows signs that it is an active infection, even low grade, that might change the rules. So we have to put that extra safety net of testing out there, see what we find, and that might, as you say, then get them to review practice.
What about South Africa losing faith in the AstraZeneca vaccine? If it's shown to not be that effective against that strain, is it still of use to us?
Look, this strain and future strains, that is a worry that the vaccines won't cover all strains and the virus will keep mutating. So they call this an escape variant because it's now the vaccines that we have, not just AstraZeneca, but some of the others show diminished efficacy against it. We're still back to where we were in terms of, what we have at hand at the moment might be different to what we have in a year. The second generation vaccines will continue to chase the virus and continue to adapt with the virus. But for now, at least having a couple of vaccines on the table in Australia and local production for AstraZeneca does make it still a really good candidate for us to be looking at in the early stage of our rollout.
Catherine, we've seen 2 cases in hotel quarantine workers in Victoria. Does that suggest to you that there's a particular problem with the way Victoria's handling these quarantine cases?
Look, I think we've put a lot in place in Victoria following the review and the reset, and I think they are in a very strong position compared to other states when we look at the practices that are in place. we're finding this sort of edge to the risk, if you like, that we now have to think further about that. Being in the corridors when the doors are open, opening the doors around the same time when meals are served, all those extra steps we now have to take, including face shields for staff and other measures. But testing off shift is something else we've learnt about. But I do wonder whether the extra testing we've done in Victoria now, daily, before all the other states, and now off shift starting today as well, whether we're actually going to find more cases that might have happened before, we just didn't see them. These are young workers, mild symptoms, not passing it on to other people. Maybe this isn't the first time it's happened. Maybe we're just now better at seeing it because we've got this really strong surveillance happening.
Catherine, WA Premier Mark McGowan today announced that hotel quarantine workers can't have a second job. Why did that take so long?
Very good question, Tommy. I actually asked the same question myself. Victoria actually moved away from working with private security companies. They now contract staff directly, and it's written into the contract that it is exclusive employment. And I think we absolutely have to look at that. This is so critical that people are remunerated well so they don't have to have second jobs, and that's also built in as part of the contract package so that you have a way of following through on that. It's not just asking people nicely, but you make sure that your staff don't need to do other jobs and they're actually required not to under the terms of their contract. We have to do that to protect that barrier or keep that barrier between the hotel and the community as tight as we possibly can.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks, Waleed.
I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing too. I mean, we had no example of that happening before. Seriously, 9 months later, are we?
Yeah.
Seems crazy.
But it's not all the states have agreed on this.
I
This is the
know.
weird thing. So they've got to have reasons for that. They can't just be... It's not like they haven't noticed, right?
No, and obviously staff need to be remunerated properly, otherwise it's not going to work. But still, seems crazy. Time for break. See you on the other side. With so much content online, it's sometimes hard to keep up with it all. And let's face it, who has the time? The Project YouTube has you covered with the stories that matter. Hit subscribe for a daily list of the news that you need to know.